Hi, I'm Lindsay Bugby from The Postman's Knock, and today I'm going to teach you how to make the perfect calligraphy envelope. Now, by the perfect envelope, I just mean one that is very nicely centered, that has a consistent slant to all of the letters, and is just generally pleasing. This is really quite tedious stuff, but it's great to know because when you have an event, like for example, a wedding, you definitely want to generate that feeling of, the recipient getting something in the mail that makes them have anticipation that really builds up to the event by appropriately representing the event. So today I'll show you exactly how to do that. You're going to need a simple compilation of supplies in order to make your perfect calligraphy envelope. So I've got a parallel glider here. The metal base is just imperative. It's super useful for drawing parallel lines, which is important for pencil guidelines. Of course, you need a pencil for pencil guidelines, an eraser for erasing the pencil guidelines. You need the pen of your choice. Doesn't matter what it is, just make sure it's one that you're comfortable writing with and it's a nib that you like. And then you'll need the ink of your choice, the envelope of your choice. I'm just working on a white envelope today, and the case could be argued that white envelopes can be made more quickly by shining up guidelines through a light box, but I want to show you how to do this manually so you know how to do it on any envelope. So white, black, whatever, because obviously you can't use a black envelope on a light box. Then I've got a centered address here. Now, if you're working off of an addresses document, just center everything because that's a key part of the centering technique that we're using in this video today. And then I've got this printable. It's free on the TPK website. I'll have a link to download it for you. It's called the Perfect Calligraphy Envelope Generator. So this is just a collection of guidelines and slant lines to make sure that you get those good guidelines on your envelope. So now what you're going to do is place your envelope on the Perfect Calligraphy Envelope Generator and grab your address to figure out how many address lines you have here. So we've got 4 lines, and we want to make sure that there's plenty of space on the envelope at the bottom because breathing room for the calligraphy, that negative space, is just as important as the filled up space. So I'm comfortable with my address ending just about here, which means that I'll need this group of guidelines, this group of guidelines, this one, and this one in order to make those 4 address lines. So a nice thing to do is line up, well, not a nice thing to do, the thing to do is to line up the envelope with the bottom guideline there. And then I'm going to start at the top and work my way down with the parallel glider. Can this be done with a regular ruler? Absolutely it can, and I did that for years before I discovered this tool. But as you can imagine, it's definitely a lot more tedious to line up your regular ruler with these guidelines as you work your way down. And it's a lot nicer to just slide. Now, the case could be made that for a light colored envelope, you can just make an envelope template, like guidelines, and pop it on a light box and shine up the guidelines through that light box. But I want you to be able to create calligraphy on any envelope and know how to do it this long way because you can't use a light box with like a black envelope, dark colored envelope. So that's why we are using a simple white envelope today. Once you're finished with this, you'll want to make X's in between the guidelines so you know where not to write, because you'll find that's actually an issue. If you don't mark these X's, it's tough to know where to write and where not to write. And then move your envelope slightly down so you can see the top and bottom of a slant line and line up the parallel glider with your slant lines. Go ahead and draw in those slant lines. I want to emphasize that it does not matter how you space these slant lines. Slant lines are not for helping you to space your letters correctly. They are only there for consistent vertical strokes. So they're just there to make sure that your strokes aren't all over the place. You really just don't have a way to space your letters correctly unless you've practiced. Do some spacing cross drills. So don't be meticulous about these, just make sure that you have a lot of those slant lines to help you. And then make a center guideline, line up your parallel divider with the edge of the envelope, and go like that. This centering technique that I'm teaching you revolves around writing out one line in pencil. This is the only line we're going to write out in pencil. So we'll see if we can get it centered. Sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you don't. Let's give it a shot though. So this address line is about 4 7/8 long. So if we center that, then it would start right here and end right here. So wow, I got really lucky on this one. This actually centered correctly the very first time. Now usually when you do this, you don't get it centered correctly the first time. And that's fine, because the whole goal is to figure out how long that calligraphy address line actually is. So once you have the amount, then you can use that length to tell yourself where the calligraphy should start and where it should end. So if you know, for example, that your calligraphy should be 6 inches long, even if it's not centered in your draft, you know, okay, when I write this, it should start here and end right here. So does that make sense? What I'm telling you is make a pencil draft of your longest calligraphy line on that address, and then give yourself horizontal guidelines to know how long that address line should actually be, all right? The good news is we don't have to make any more pencil drafts. If this was an incredibly important envelope, then I would go ahead and draft out all the calligraphy for every single line. But what I'm showing you here is a shortcut, so we can estimate just based off of what we're seeing here for the remaining address lines. Now what let's do is mark where every address line starts and ends in relation to that longest line there. Now granted, the spacing is going to be just slightly off because in the digital version of this address, the 2 and the 2 are both full size, and I like to make my numbers smaller in calligraphy, so it will be just a tad bit off, but we can still work with this. What we're doing here is eyeballing the spatial relationship of these address lines based on the computer centering. So we have to imagine that this address line is a little bit smaller than it actually is right here because I made these 2's smaller. So what the computer tells us is the L should end above the A, but what I'm actually going to do is imagine that it ends above the I. So maybe right here. And then it's supposed to end at around the 2, but I'm just going to take whatever this is times 2. You know what, let's make this a clean 4 inches long. Spacing is definitely more of an art than a science, but the good news is, especially if you're working on an envelope where it doesn't quite matter, you can always add a little element to the front of your address line or a little flourish to the end. Now I'll bet this address line will be just about as long as Luca and Lorenzo because these numbers are going to be so small. So let's try making this one, you know, if this is 4 inches long, let's make this one 4.25 inches. And then we'll end with that last address line, but I want to see how we do with these two before I estimate how long this is going to be. As soon as I can establish the length of this, I think that I can establish the length of that. Okay, so moment of truth. Let's go ahead and write out that first address line using this pen. And I know this video is gonna be super long, so I am not going to do this in real time. You know that this is sped up. This is not regular writing speed. This is taking me a lot longer than depicted, so just remember that. Okay, so very good news. That was a success. I was able to fit that calligraphy in between the two guidelines here. Keeping in mind that as I got closer to Lorenzo here, I was going, I'm gonna have to like tighten things up a little bit. So I didn't do anything crazy with the D and added the L pretty quickly after the D. There's not a lot of space in between those two. But yeah, it looks good. I know that this is gonna work, so let me go ahead and write over that. And now we'll move on to this third address line and see how we do. So far, so good. A lot of time invested, so we certainly hope it works. Make these numbers about as tall as those numbers. Okay, this address line worked pretty well. I did get a little too nervous at the end that this word wasn't going to make it all the way to the last guideline. So I made the spacing right here kind of weird, but you know, whatever. You won't be able to tell just from looking at it straight on. And now let's use that top address line to figure out how long the last address line is going to be. It looks like the F here starts at the beginning of the C in Luca. So let's see how long that is. That is about 1 3/8. So let's go ahead and make a 1 3/8 guideline here and a 1 3/8 guideline here and hope for the best. So for this last address line, I went past this right mark, but that is why I waited to cross the F, because I thought that might happen, and I was able to pull the word back over to the left by starting the cross on the F earlier. So that's why we dot our I's and cross our T's last. Once your ink has had a chance to dry, I've given this iron gall ink about 5 minutes, you're going to erase your pencil guidelines. If your eraser is like mine and it's been lovingly used, then go ahead and rub off some of that used eraser on paper, just in case. You don't know if some of this black is going to get on your envelope or not. That looks pretty clean, so I am comfortable erasing with this now. Be very, very careful. Luckily, this envelope isn't very flimsy. It's a nice one from Cards and Pockets, so it's not going to crinkle very easily, but the thinner your envelope, the easier it is to hit it wrong and have it crumple up a little bit. And we don't want any wrinkles in our envelope because obviously this was a whole thing, getting this perfectly centered. So we want to make sure that this is treated with TLC and ends up looking good. Though frankly, even if I crumpled it, I would probably go ahead and send it because it was so much work to get this all centered. It's serious, you know, and a lot of us artistic and linguistic types aren't super into math, so this is quite the undertaking. Now just take a minute to make sure everything looks good. I just noticed that I forgot to dot my I here. and now it's fine. And then if you want to, on this type of envelope, you can just do one stamp. I'm using vintage stamps for demonstration purposes, or these always look good with a couple of different stamps and different orientations, just depending on the effect that you're going for. But yeah, that is how you do that. I'm aware that this tutorial is long and it's tedious, but that's because centering your calligraphy and making sure everything is consistent is a long and tedious process, and it takes a lot of practice. That said, the more you do it, the better you'll get at it. Like the fact that I got this line correct spatially at the beginning, it was partly miracle, but partly I sort of was able to figure out, okay, I think it'll be about this long just based on centering so many envelopes in the past. There are a couple of shortcuts though. If you want to go faster on envelope calligraphy, justify everything to the left. Figure out a way to do that that looks cool, or you can just center the recipient's name and then write the address in sans serif lettering underneath. I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial, and of course if you have any questions, reach out. I am here to help. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.